Imagine flying over a desert in southern Peru. Below you, the land is flat, dry, lifeless. But then suddenly the ground itself begins to shift. Shapes emerge, massive shapes. A monkey with a curling tail, a hummingbird with wings stretched wide, a giant spider etched into the very earth. And they're not small. Some stretch longer than skyscrapers. Some are so big they can only be seen from the sky. And here's the kicker. They were carved by people over 1,500 years ago. No planes, no satellites, no drones. So the question hits you like a punch. Why would ancient people design images they could never see in full? Were they messages to the gods? Maps of the stars? Or, if you believe some, were they literal landing strips for visitors from the sky? The Nazca Lines are one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. And today, we're going to uncover them. But don't get too comfortable. Because the deeper you go into the desert, the stranger the story becomes. Some of these lines don't just defy explanation, they rewrite what we thought we knew about ancient civilization. And by the end, I promise, the answer won't be what you expected. Let's start with the land itself, the Nazca Desert. Picture this, a plateau over 200 square miles wide. The sun blazes relentlessly, the wind howls, but rain, almost none. In fact, some parts of this desert haven't seen measurable rainfall for centuries. It's one of the driest places on Earth. And because of that, the Nazca Lines have been preserved like ancient signatures sealed in a vault. The thin layer of dark stones on the desert surface, when scraped away, reveals lighter soil beneath. That's all it took. Simple technique. But the results? Monuments that outlived empires. Now here's what makes it even weirder. From ground level, you'd barely notice them. Standing in the desert, you might see a shallow trench stretching off into the horizon. That's it. No giant monkey, no hummingbird, no spider, just lines and dirt. It's only when you rise into the air, hundreds of feet up, that the magic happens. Patterns leap out, shapes that make sense only from above. Which leads to the first big mystery loop. Why would a people with no flying technology create works visible only from the sky? For centuries, locals knew about the lines. They walked past them, crossed them, maybe even considered them sacred. But the modern world didn't really discover the Nazca Lines until the 1920s and 1930s, when commercial pilots began flying across southern Peru. Imagine being one of those early pilots. No GPS, no Google Maps. Just you, an open cockpit, and endless desert below. Then suddenly, you glance down and your stomach drops. The ground is covered in geometric patterns, straight lines running for miles, perfect triangles, spirals, shapes of animals so large they dwarf football fields. Pilots came back wide-eyed, spreading the word. There are drawings on the desert floor. Massive ones. Who put them there? And so the world's attention turned to Nazca. Here's where the story gets personal. Enter Maria Reiche, a German mathematician who came to Peru in the 1930s. She wasn't an explorer or an adventurer at first, she was a teacher. But when she heard about the lines, she was hooked, obsessed. Reiche spent decades studying them. She camped in the desert, measured the figures with ropes and stakes, slept beside the lines to protect them from looters and vandals. She gave her life to the Nazca Desert, quite literally. Why? Because she believed she had found the key. Reiche's theory, the Nazca Lines were a giant astronomical calendar. Some lines, she argued, aligned perfectly with the rising and setting of the sun during solstices. Others pointed to stars or constellations. In her view, the desert was a giant observatory, and the Nazca people were sky watchers mapping the heavens. That idea lit the academic world on fire. A cosmic calendar drawn in the dirt, and it seemed to fit. Until it didn't. At first glance, the calendar theory makes sense. People in the Andes depended on agriculture. Knowing when to plant and harvest was life or death. What better way than a giant map of the stars carved into the earth? But here's where it gets messy. Not all the lines align with stars. Not all of them point to solstices. Some zigzag with no clear purpose. Others form geometric patterns too abstract to be useful for farming. And then there are the animal figures, the monkey, the spider, the condor. Beautiful, yes. But what do they have to do with telling time? Scientists began poking holes in Reiche's theory. And she fought back. But the more we studied, the more the mystery deepened. Which brings us to the second big curiosity loop. If not a calendar, then what? Here's why this matters. The Nazca Lines aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're a message from a vanished culture, the Nazca people who thrived between 200 BCE and 600 CE. And they left almost nothing behind. No written records. Few artifacts. Just pottery, ruins, and these lines. Think about that. An entire civilization reduced to whispers in the desert. And the only clear thing they've left us is a message scratched into the earth so big, only the gods or future generations with flying machines could read it. That's emotional stakes right there. Because when we try to solve the mystery of the Nazca Lines, we're not just solving a puzzle. We're trying to understand what an entire people wanted us to remember. So, what were these lines really for? Some argue they were pathways for rituals, where people walked in processions to honor their gods. Others see them as symbols of water and fertility, vital in one of the driest places on Earth. And then there's the wild theory that refuses to die, landing strips for alien spacecraft. Sounds crazy? Maybe. But stick with me, because in the next chapter, we're diving headfirst into the theories, and some of them are a lot stranger and a lot more compelling than you think. Let's start with the most rational explanation, the idea that the Nazca Lines were a giant astronomical calendar. This theory has its roots in Maria Reiche's work. She argued that many of the lines aligned with solstices and equinoxes, the moments when the sun rises or sets in specific positions, marking the agricultural calendar. Think about it. You're an ancient farmer in one of the harshest deserts on Earth. Your crops depend not on rainfall, you're not getting any of that, but on underground aquifers and carefully timed planting. Knowing exactly when the seasons shift is a matter of survival. So maybe the lines were a calendar in the sand, an observatory so massive you could walk through time itself. It's a beautiful idea. And on the surface, it works. Some lines really do align with the winter and summer solstice. A few point toward bright stars that rose over the horizon 2,000 years ago. But here's where the cracks appear. Not all the lines match. In fact, the vast majority point nowhere significant. Some even bend or curve in directions that make no sense astronomically. And then, what about the animals? A giant monkey, a hummingbird, a whale etched into the desert. What constellations do those represent? Scientists tested Reiche's hypothesis with computers, plugging in star maps, calculating ancient skies. The result? Inconclusive at best. The lines don't add up to a neat cosmic calendar. And yet, some evidence refuses to go away. The spider geoglyph, for example, appears to represent the constellation Orion. The monkey's spiral tail could be linked to the galaxy's spiral form. So maybe it wasn't a precise calendar. Maybe it was symbolic, part astronomy, part religion, part myth. That's where the curiosity loop opens wide. What if the lines were more than one thing at once? Now let's talk about the wildest, most controversial theory, the one that refuses to die. The alien landing strip theory. In the 1960s, Swiss author Erich von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods, a book that flipped the world upside down. He claimed that ancient monuments, Egyptian pyramids, Stonehenge, Mayan temples were built not by humans alone, but with help from extraterrestrials. And the Nazca Lines, to von Daniken, they were the smoking gun. Look at those straight lines, he argued. Some run for miles, as flat as runways. Huge rectangles carved into the desert. Perfectly straight strips pointing in random directions. To him, it was obvious. The Nazca people built runways for alien spacecraft. It's easy to see why this idea caught fire. It was the 1960s. Space exploration was booming. Humanity had just launched satellites, was racing toward the moon. Suddenly, the idea that aliens visited Earth didn't sound so crazy. The Nazca Lines became part of pop culture. Documentaries, TV specials, even ancient Aliens episodes repeated the claim. But let's hit pause. Because here's the problem. There's zero hard evidence for alien spaceships. Archaeologists point out that the runways aren't built for weight. They're just shallow scrapes in the desert soil. If a craft landed, the surface would crumble instantly. And why would advanced aliens capable of crossing galaxies need a runway at all? Imagine a UFO that can bend space and time, but still has to line up for a takeoff like a 747. Not exactly convincing. But here's the twist. While the alien theory is weak, it forced scientists and the public to pay attention. Suddenly, the Nazca Lines weren't just obscure scratches in the dirt, they were front-page mysteries. And in that spotlight, new research uncovered explanations just as fascinating without the aliens, which brings us to the ritual theory. Picture this. The year is 400 CE. You are part of the Nazca culture, living on the edge of survival in the desert. Rain is rare, water is life, and your gods control it. Once a year, your community gathers. Drums echo, flutes wail. The air is heavy with incense. Together, you walk out into the desert. Not randomly, you follow massive lines carved into the ground, paths that stretch for miles. You walk in procession, chanting, praying, tracing figures of animals sacred to your culture. The monkey, the hummingbird, the spider, each with symbolic meaning tied to fertility, rain, or the cosmos. These weren't landing strips. They were pilgrimage routes, ritual pathways. This theory explains something the others don't. Why the lines are so shallow. They weren't meant to be seen from the sky. They were meant to be walked, experienced from the ground. The act of moving through them was the ritual. And here's the emotional punch. Archaeologists have found altars, broken pottery, and ritual offerings near the lines, as if people had been gathering there, celebrating, sacrificing. This view makes the Nazca Lines less about aliens or calendars and more about people. Real people, facing the brutal desert, doing whatever they could to connect with forces greater than themselves. But wait, there's still a mystery. Some lines are so perfectly geometric, so straight they look engineered. Others are abstract zigzags, spirals, trapezoids. Were these too ritualistic? Or something else? Which leads us to even stranger ideas. The Nazca people didn't just need rituals, they needed water. Some researchers believe the lines were directly connected to water cults. The trapezoids and spirals might point toward underground aquifers or ceremonial wells. The animal shapes could symbolize fertility, rain, or agricultural cycles. Think about the hummingbird. In the Andes, it was linked to rain and rebirth. The spider, associated with water and fertility. The monkey, found in the Amazon jungle lush, green, the opposite of the desert. In this view, the Nazca Lines were prayers written in the sand, desperate calls to the gods. Send us water. Let us live. It makes sense. In the world's driest desert, survival was a miracle, and carving those miracles into the earth was their way of asking the universe for mercy. But just when you think you've cracked the code, another theory appears. Some anthropologists suggest that walking the lines wasn't just visual, it was sonic. Imagine groups walking long, straight lines, drumming, chanting. The desert floor amplifying sound, creating echoes. The landscape itself turning into a stage, the lines becoming pathways of performance. If true, the Nazca Lines weren't pictures, they were experiences. Living rituals that blended movement, sound, and space. A kind of theater on the scale of miles. So, what are the Nazca Lines? A calendar etched in stone? Runways for beings from the stars? Pilgrimage routes for desperate prayers? Or giant artworks meant to echo across time? The truth is, we don't know. And maybe that's the point. But the mystery doesn't stop here. In fact, it gets even stranger. Because in the last 2 decades, new technology satellites, drones, even AI has uncovered lines we never knew existed. Shapes hidden for centuries, some too faint for the human eye. And what they reveal might just change everything we thought we knew about the Nazca Desert. Every great mystery has its guardian. For the Nazca Lines, that guardian was Maria Reiche. She wasn't born in Peru. She wasn't even an archaeologist by training. She was a German mathematician and teacher who came to Lima in the 1930s to tutor a diplomat's children. But fate pulled her south, to the barren desert of Nazca. There, she saw what others had only glanced at, lines stretching to the horizon, figures sketched into the earth. And she fell in love. Not with a person, not with a country, with lines in the sand. Maria Reich made the desert her home. For nearly 50 years, she studied, mapped, and defended the Nazca Lines. She would drag measuring tapes across the desert floor, sometimes alone, sometimes with a single assistant. She slept under the stars, fighting sandstorms and desert heat. She carried ladders so she could climb high enough to sketch shapes no one else bothered to record. And she was relentless. When looters came, she stood in their way. When politicians ignored the lines, she campaigned in the capital. When tourists stomped across the geoglyphs, she literally patrolled the desert herself. At one point, she lived in a tiny hut near the figures. Imagine that. Decades in the desert, just to protect scratches in the dirt that most people couldn't even see from the ground. But for Reike, these weren't scratches. They were messages. She was convinced the Nazca Lines formed a giant astronomical calendar, and she fought for that theory until her death in 1998. Even when critics doubted her, she kept going. And in the end, her greatest victory wasn't proving her theory. It was saving the lines themselves. Thanks to her tireless advocacy, UNESCO declared the Nazca Lines a World Heritage Site in 1994. Without Maria Reiche, the desert might still hold its mysteries, but the lines, they'd likely be gone. Erased by trucks, farms, construction. So before we chase theories and conspiracies, we pause here to honor the woman who made sure we'd even have a mystery left to solve. Maria Reich did what she could with ropes, ladders, and math. But today, we have satellites, drones, LiDAR, and even artificial intelligence. And here's where the story takes a twist, because new technology has revealed that the Nazca Lines are far more numerous than we ever imagined. In 2018, a team of archaeologists using drones discovered more than 50 new geoglyphs hidden in the desert. Some were so faint, no human eye on the ground could have ever spotted them. Among them, humanoid figures, strange animals, and abstract shapes. Then, in 2020, researchers found a giant cat geoglyph stretched across a hillside. Think about that. After nearly a century of study, we're still finding new figures. The desert keeps whispering secrets. And just when you think we've seen it all, satellites scan deeper. LIDA are a technology that shoots laser pulses from the air, detects subtle depressions in the soil. With it, archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of new lines and figures, some dating back earlier than the Nazca culture itself. This changes everything. It suggests that what we call the Nazca Lines aren't just the work of one culture, one time. They're a layered story, stretching across centuries. Different groups may have carved different figures for different reasons. The desert is a palimpsest, a layered book where each generation etched its own message. Here's where the emotional weight hits. Imagine the Nazca people carving a hummingbird so massive that no one alive could ever see it whole. Imagine walking along those lines, knowing your feet were tracing something greater than yourself. Were they trying to speak to the gods? To the stars? To us? Thousands of years later, we're still listening, still staring down from satellites, searching for meaning. And maybe that's the point. The Nazca Lines aren't just a mystery to solve. They're a mirror. They show us how badly humans need to connect with something bigger, whether it's the cosmos, the divine, or our own legacy. So after all this, what are the Nazca Lines? The truth is, they're probably all of the above. Some were astronomical markers, some were ritual pathways, some were offerings for rain and fertility. Some may have been artworks meant to awe. And yes, some just happened to look like runways, but not for aliens. The Nazca Desert isn't holding one answer. It's holding many. A hybrid of religion, science, and survival. And here's the final twist. Maybe the reason we can't pin them down to one purpose is because they were never meant for one. For the Nazca, the lines weren't puzzles. They were prayers. Walked, sung, lived, and drawn into the earth so they'd last beyond their own time. From the air, the Nazca Lines look like messages. From the ground, they feel like paths. The truth? They're both and neither. They are whispers from a vanished civilization etched into stone for the ages. The question is, are we listening? So tell me, are the Nazca Lines landing strips? Are they a calendar? Or are they something else entirely? Drop your theory in the comments. I want to hear what you think. And if you loved diving into this mystery, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about the questions we're still brave enough to ask today.